PowerPoint colours. I actually borrowed this presentation slides from Disability Louth as it makes it a more comfortable and accessible viewing experience for the visually impaired. So this is just a quick agenda. We are going to have a series of speakers, and I'm just going to give you a run through. We should hopefully be finished by 3:30, and if we're finished before that, well and good, but hopefully we take the time to kind of find out about what each other does, have some really informative and subject matter expert presentations, and just enjoy the afternoon as we celebrate National Social Inclusion Week in collaboration with Louth PPN. So we'll have welcome introductions. There'll be a quick SICAP presentation from myself, PPN presentation, our guest speakers, just a very quick preview to our community call video, which came out late last night. We have a few final edits. We're very excited to share it with you today. And then question and answers for the panelists, and then our closing remarks. Okay, Kim? So for you that know or may not know, my name is Maeve Harkin. I'm the Social Inclusion Manager under the SICAP programme for Louth LEADER Partnership, local development company. Today we have Grania Carroll, the PPN resource worker, who is going to do a presentation on an overview of the PPN with Mary Deary, who works in the community development section of Louth County Council, and with Irwin and Anastasia Crickley, who are going to do a presentation on the collaboration and collective action to achieve social inclusion and equality. We're then going to have a quick preview, which I'm very excited about our community call video. We're going to have a quick question and answer summary. So please, your chat function is there. Please put in any queries, any questions that you'd like to learn about Louth LEADER Partnership, SICAP, PPN, social inclusion expert, anything in this day. And then we'll have our closing remarks. Okay, Kim. So now, every good community development practitioner, just to kind of settle everybody in and relax a bit, will always start with an icebreaker. This is a new way to do things, and that it's virtual, and I'm kind of hoping that you're all shouting at your screen. So I'm going to start with this icebreaker just to ease us all in, and to maybe make us think and have things to resonate with us. So what was founded on the 21st of April 2011? What is currently in its 10th year? Okay, Kim? Zoom. So I think this has really resonated with me, as I definitely didn't hear of it until I was dragged kicking and screaming into it in March of this year. And in recent months, we've had to learn quickly how to connect, how to work in the new normal, how to find ways to help people, how to build resilience, and how do we do this? And we did it by working together. We panicked at the start, but we didn't show it. And we came together to support and to help the greater needs of the community. And we've done a great job to date. Okay, Kim? So SICAP is just one project or one programme that is under Louth LEADER Partnership Local Development Committee or Company. So the Social Inclusion Programme is what I manage, and it's a community activation programme 2018 to 2022, and it provides supports to community groups in Goal 1 and individuals in Goal 2. The LEADER Rural Development Programme is 2014 to 2020. Provides funding to rural communities in County Louth. It has 3 main themes: economic development, social inclusion, and 3, the rural development, and 4.1 million is available over the lifetime of the programme. We have the 2 local employment services and Job Club. The local employment services operate in Dundalk and in Drogheda and provide an adult guidance service to unemployed job seekers. In Dundalk, we have the Jobs Club, which supports individuals with CV preparation and job interview skills. The TOOS programme provides community-based work placement for unemployed job seekers. Participants are placed in a community group for 12 months, working 19.5 hours a week. And it's a great start, and it's a great progression for a lot of our SICAP clients. And the Genesis programme supports parents and young people with early intervention supports within the school community to promote better outcomes for children, Changing Lives Initiative, and Kiva are the other programs delivered by Genesis. So I suppose when it comes to kind of progression, supporting communities, supporting people to be probably the best version of themselves and to reach their own potential, Louth LEADER Partnership really is your one-stop shop for that. And today I'm going to give you an overview of the SICAP programme in the spirit of celebrating National Social Inclusion Week. Okay, Kim? So the aim of SICAP is to reduce poverty and promote social inclusion and equality in Ireland through supporting communities and individuals using community development approaches, engagement and collaboration. And so what that really means is that we give community groups, local community groups and clients, we enable them to reach their full potential at a pace that suits them and that they feel like they're making a difference and can change at a time when they want to. Okay, Kim? So this is a large programme. There's up to 20 staff, and we've labour market staff who we're very appreciative of. And here's our office locations in Drogheda and Mayoralty Street, in Dundalk and Park Street, in Redeemer Outreach and Merhavnamora Outreach, which we're very proud to have and support. So it's a big programme, and we're here to help and to do our best. Okay, Kim? Okay, so the overview of work. So very simply, the Social Inclusion and Community Activation Programme, SICAP, it's a 5-year programme, which we're very grateful for. We provide support both to community groups, which we're here to talk and celebrate today in Goal 1, and to individuals and clients in Goal 2. So Goal 1, just broken down, just very simply, is community development and our social enterprise supports. And we recently launched the first social enterprise strategy in County Louth in July, which we're proud of. And Goal 2 is our lifelong learning, our employment activation, our enterprise and business supports, and our children and family supports. Okay, Kim? Okay, so we have targets which we aspire and which we reach, and they're set every year. So there's 63 local community groups supported, and we have 822 individuals supported. And where that looks quite numbery and statistics, really behind every group and behind every person are real people. They have real stories, and we're here to help them to be the best version of themselves. Okay, Kim? So what is community development? Community development is defined as a developmental activity comprised of both a task and a process. The task is social change to achieve equality, social justice and human rights. And the process is the application of principles of the participation, empowerment and collective decision making in a structured and coordinated way. And in simple terms, that means that community development is where community members are the experts in their lives and communities, and we value the community knowledge. So we're today, and I am quite conscious that it does look like quite a top down and everything I probably trained against approach. What I'm trying to explain is that this is a starting point for us today, and that me as a leader of the programme want to tell you a bit about how it works, about what we do. It's our first time to celebrate National Social Inclusion Week, and I think it's a good experience for me. And I think as we learn and grow and have awareness and engage and collaborate and grow strong, I think that we will have the capacity for my staff and their groups to be delivering their webinars and their maybe with people again, conferences in future National Social Inclusion Weeks. Okay, Kim? So this is our community development officers. These are the 4 officers and their locations that were county-wide coverage, and they would meet with the groups, they would do the registration form, they would work on a plan, on their goals, they would offer technical, developmental supports, they would work in a kind of a pre-development phase and an ongoing phase, and you know the goal is to be self-sustaining, and that could be something very quickly or it can take time, and that's why it's always at your own pace and your own level. So Tony Jordan is the Community Development Officer for Merhavnamora Outreach. Tara McGowan is Dundalk and Mid Louth. Eileen Haven is Redeemer Outreach and North Louth. and Northern Coughlin is Drogheda, South Louth and Mid Louth. So we have county-wide coverage. So anybody in the audience today that's, maybe thinking about, setting up a group or joining a group, or, or thinking about how do I go about it, this is how you go about it. You contact us and we will help you. Okay, Kim? And here's our numbers. So as I said, this is all recorded. We'll send everybody who's attended the slides as well today. So here's our names, our contact numbers, our emails, and please make contact with our Community Development Social Inclusion team. Okay, I'm just going to now pass you over to Gráinne Carroll, the PPN resource worker, for an overview of the PPN.
Thanks, Maeve. Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to today's webinar to celebrate Social Inclusion Week. I'm Gráinne Carroll, I'm the Louth PPN resource worker. And today I'm going to give you a brief presentation on Louth Public Participation Network. As a result of COVID, unfortunately, I haven't been in a position to get out and about and introduce myself to PPN members, but some of you I may have already spoken to over the phone or via email. I hope today's presentation gives you an overview of the PPN and that we are always open and welcoming to new members. Social inclusion in our communities is extremely important, and for those of you who aren't already PPN members, you will note in the presentation that the social inclusion is one of 3 PPN pillars. The main aim or activity of our social inclusion members is to improve the life chances and opportunity of those who are marginalised in society, living in poverty, or living with unemployment. Social inclusion members work to develop and build sustainable communities. They aim to build communities that promote the values of equality and inclusion and that have respect for human rights. So I'm just going to start the presentation now. So Louth Public Participation Network, connecting communities. PPNs were introduced in 2014 as part of local government reform, and they are operational in each city and county council area in Ireland. The PPN is a flat structure, which means that all members have an equal voice. So essentially that means there's no leader, there's no overall spokesperson or chairperson, and everyone has an equal input into decision making. Louth Public Participation Network is a network of not-for-profit community, voluntary, social inclusion and environmental organisations working together to improve and enhance the quality of life of our citizens. The PPN allows local authorities to connect with community groups around the county. PPNs give citizens a greater say in local government decisions which affect their own communities. Okay, Kim, thank you. Every PPN member belongs to one of 3 pillars. When an organisation registers with the PPN, they select the pillar that most closely resembles the activity of their organisation. So the 3 pillars are environment, social inclusion and community. Kim. It is also divided into 3 municipal district areas of Dundalk, Drogheda and Ardee. Okay, Kim, thanks. Our aim as the PPN is to coordinate how the community in Louth is represented. We also aim to make our members stronger, keep our members informed about local developments, and to make sure our members' voices are heard where it matters. There's currently 400 groups, members of the PPN. They're divided into the 3 pillars. Social inclusion, there's 126. There's 7 environmental groups, and there's 267 community and voluntary groups. The role of the PPN resource worker, which is myself, and the PPN secretariat. We act as the main link for the local authority to connect with the community, social inclusion and environmental sectors. We enable and support community groups to have their voices heard. We support community groups to participate in local policy and decision-making bodies. And we provide networking and training opportunities for local community groups. There are 18 positions on the Secretariat Board. There's currently 6 that are filled and we have 2 vacancies. And they're divided as below: 5 for community, 5 for environment, 5 for social inclusion, and then there's 1 each in each of the municipal district areas. And the Secretariat would meet 6 times per year. PPN representatives. PPN reps are PPN members who have been elected by one of the 3 pillars to represent the PPN on a committee, board or advisory group. Each PPN member can nominate 1 rep. Elections are ratified by the plenary, Louth PPN currently has 30 reps on committees and boards. And just below there, you'll see some examples of PPN reps and committees. So it's Joint Policing Forums, the SPCs, the LCDC, Peace 4 Partnership Board, Louth Local Sports Partnership Committee, and Louth Leader Partnership Board. PPN meetings, the Secretariat meet a minimum of 6 times per year, but as it stands at the minute and meetings have gone online, we're actually meeting on a monthly basis now. Municipal district meetings, there's normally 2 of them per year, plenary meetings 2 per year, PPN reps meetings 2 per year, and then linkage groups would meet say 2 to 3 times per year or as required. So the question is, why should I join? Or how do I become a member? So the why. If you become a PPN member, you've access to information on available funding and grants. You get access to training and capacity building, networking and collaboration with other similar community groups, representation on various local authority and other local agency committees and boards, consultation, you can take part in and be consulted on issues, strategies or programs that are relevant to you or your group, the opportunity to advertise your activities via the PPN newsletter, the website or social media platforms, and information. We in the PPN act as an information hub, providing updates to members weekly via our newsletter, our website and social media. Yes, how do you join? It's very easy to join the Public Participation Network. If you see, there's the link there below to our website, and you just complete the registration form and click submit. It's as simple as that. There is some criteria involved in becoming a PPN member. You must be an active group with a postal address in the county, operate on a not-for-profit basis, be volunteer-led. You may have paid staff, but you must be under voluntary control, be independent, not a subcommittee or subgroup of another organisation, have at least 5 members and are open to new members, have an appropriate governance structure, which means a set of rules, constitution and financial procedures, meet regularly, be in existence for at least 6 months prior to your application, and be non-party political. And then just on the last slide there, you'll see the contact details. There's the website, which contains all important information, and we're actually currently updating at the moment. So watch this space for our new website next month, which we hope to launch. And then just my email address and the general PPN email address and my contact number. So that's it. I'll hand you back over to Maeve. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Grania. That's an excellent overview. And I've really gained an understanding of the structure of the PPN, and thanks for your details. And as I said, I'll be sharing the presentation slides, and it'll be a recording to everybody who's attended today. So thanks for that. So I'd like to hand you over now to Irwin and Anastasia Crickley, who are going to do a presentation together in collaboration and collective achievement to achieve social inclusion and equality. And it's really a great opportunity to listen to these experienced speakers in social inclusion during National Social Inclusion Week. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. I'm just hoping this will go smoothly and that everybody can see that on the screen.
Yep.
Okay, great. So thank you, Maeve, for I suppose, and to Maureen for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I used to, at one very early stage in my life, live in RD, so I have some connection to the county, and have been up to visit you in Louth LEADER Partnership a number of times over the years. I work with Community Work Ireland, and just to give you a bit of a background, Community Work Ireland, people may know it as the Community Workers Cooperative. We renamed or rebranded ourselves a number of years ago as Community Work Ireland, and we're the main national organisation that supports and promotes community work and community development as a key approach to tackling poverty, inequality, discrimination, promoting human rights and social change. It's a membership organisation. It's open to community workers and others involved in community work who support the ethos and vision of Community Work Ireland. And I suppose one of the things we were asked to myself and Anastasia, who is again a member of Community Work Ireland and a former chairperson of Community Work Ireland and is the chair of our policy subgroup at the moment, We were asked to come along and talk to you a little bit about social inclusion and inequality, and I suppose collective action to achieve social inclusion and equality, particularly in Louth. So I'm going to give you a sort of a national overview of what's out there in terms of poverty and social exclusion. Anastasia is going to hone in a little bit more on Louth and maybe ask a few pertinent questions, and maybe also to touch on the context of COVID, which is obviously very much part of our lives at the moment. I hope that's okay. Just in terms of full disclosure, I work part-time as one of the national coordinators of Community Work Ireland. We just have one full-time position that's shared by myself and my colleague Rachel Doyle, and I actually work part-time for the PPN in Galway City. So it's great to see Grania and to put a face to the name. So in terms of poverty, social exclusion and social inclusion, just to give you an idea of what's out there in terms of a national policy and national strategies. But first of all, I suppose, just so we're all on the same sheet, as it were, in terms of social exclusion, the national definition of social exclusion, which has been around in Ireland since 1997, is that people are living in poverty if their income and resources are so inadequate as to preclude them from having a standard of living which is regarded as acceptable by Irish society generally. So it's a relative definition. It's a definition of how your resources and income are in relation to what is accepted as general by Irish society. And as a result of inadequate income and resources, people may be excluded and marginalised from participating in activities which are considered the norm for other people in society. And we've had, as I said, a definition of social exclusion since 1997, and for the first time in the Roadmap for Social Inclusion, which is the new strategy for social inclusion that was launched earlier this year, they introduced a definition of social inclusion. And they define social inclusion as being achieved when people have access to sufficient income, resources and services to enable them to play an active part in their communities and participate in activities that are generally considered the norm for people in society. So they've sort of flipped it, and that's interesting, because I think instead of focusing on the negative, you know, it perhaps gives us an opportunity on focusing on what we are trying to achieve, what we are aiming for. And I've always liked this quote from Nelson Mandela, because I think it's an important one to remind ourselves about, and that is, as he says, like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural, it is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. And I think it's a really critical understanding of poverty and social exclusion. They're not natural, they are man-made. And I remember saying this actually at a Department of Social Protection event a couple of years ago, saying it was man-made, and perhaps man-made wasn't the term to use, but it was generally agreed that yes, it is man-made and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. And in Ireland, we actually have a long history of strategies to overcome social exclusion and poverty, dating back to the first one in 1997. And there have been several iterations since that. And I'll touch on the most up-to-date one. But I think it is important to say that we have an overall national policy of reducing consistent poverty in Ireland to 2%. And while the year for that target has changed over the last couple of years, it's now 2025. Luckily, and I suppose it's down to advocacy and to campaigning with the department, they haven't reduced that. So our overall aim is to reduce consistent poverty to 2%. But I'll give you an idea of how big a job that is in a second. But I suppose just to say that there are a plethora of national policies and national strategies to achieve social inclusion. Some of them are focused on different target groups, such as travellers. Some are general in terms of, for example, better outcomes and brighter futures, which focuses on all young people. But we do have quite a number of policies and strategies. I'm going to hone in on two in a while, but just to say that, yes, the strategies and the policies are there. Quite often it's in the implementation of these strategies and policies that we fall down, because despite all of the policies and strategies we have, poverty and deprivation in Ireland is still very much a reality.
Sorry, Anne, I don't want to interrupt you, but your slides aren't moving.
Oh, they're moving for me. They're not moving for you.
No, I don't think so.
What am I stuck at then?
At the first one.
Okay, okay. Kim, I'm not sure if you can do...
If you just hit the slideshow button again, it might sort it out for you. At the very bottom, there's a little slideshow button. But if not, I can bring them up.
I might just end it and start again. My lovely slides. Are people saying they haven't seen my lovely slides? Okay. Are they moving now?
No.
No. Can you?
Do you want me to? Yeah. If you unshare, I'll share your slides. No problem.
Yeah.
When you can.
So apologies. It is a bit disconcerting not to be able to see people at the webinar as well.
Just give me a second just to get them.
Yeah.
Just hang on. Have them on the desktop. Give us 1 second.
Okay, maybe go on to the next one. Yeah,
Oh,
that's my lovely quote from Nelson Mandela. Maybe if you go on to the next one. Okay, can people see, are they working now?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So maybe perhaps the next one, Kim, and I just, yeah, so I was saying that despite all of the policies and strategies, poverty and deprivation is still a real reality in Ireland. And I don't know if people were listening to the news today, but there are a non-acceptable number of children living in poverty. Any type of poverty and social exclusion is quite unacceptable anyway. I think one of the key things is the CSO just launched a separate figure for the deprivation rate from 2019, and we see that that deprivation rate is actually on the increase again. So after the recession, or as the recovery had set in, we had seen a slight decline in the figures, but now we're seeing them increase again, and that is not a good thing, particularly in the current context. So poverty and social exclusion, they're quite hard to shift, quite hard to make a dent in poverty levels and social inclusion levels. And I think the other thing that is really important to look at is that there is a consistency of inequality. And by that, I mean, it's the same groups of people, it's the same communities that feature in the poverty and social exclusion figures year in, year out. And the other thing I think to note is that many groups and communities, for example, travellers, are not captured in the figures. So we do know that some of the communities that are most at risk of poverty are actually not covered, not captured in the figures that we measure. Can you go on to the next one, Kim? Thank you. Okay, and I suppose for us in Community Work Ireland, participation and representation, it's like, for us, it's like an iceberg or a pyramid. And while representation, and we all live in a society where representational democracy is I suppose, the most pertinent type of democracy, representation is very important, but so also is participation. And if you have a look at the little cartoon just for a second, if you look at representative democracy, as you vote for me once every 4 years and once every 5 years, and I speak on behalf of you or your community, participative democracy gives a kind of an antidote to that, and looks at how, you know, facilitating people, supporting people to be able to speak for themselves. And we think if you go on there, Kim, I think in order to support that type of participation, it's about looking at the rights of communities to be supported to establish and develop autonomous participative groups and networks to promote and advance their rights and critique policies in a constructive and proactive way. It's about being consulted, involved and participating meaningfully in decision-making processes that affect their lives. And it's about being supported to gain the confidence and skills to articulate and represent their needs in an effective and inclusive way. And if you go on, Kim, one of the key ways, and Anastasia will be picking up on this, But one of the key ways, as far as Community Work Ireland is concerned, of ensuring that is through community work, through community development. And I won't read out the definition that we use of community development, which is the sort of internationally accepted definition of community development, as Maeve has already outlined it, but it is outlined in the All-Ireland Standards for Community Work, which was produced by the All-Ireland Endorsement Body in 2016, and Community Work Ireland provides the secretariat to AIEB, and Anastasia chairs AIEB. And it is about, I think, bringing a standard to our understanding of what community work is. There's nothing, well, it's a personal bugbear of mine, but I hate going into a group and being asked, what's your definition of community development? Community development is as defined. How you use it, etc., is open to to negotiation and how groups understand it, but community development is what community development is. And it is underpinned by 5 values: collectivity, community empowerment, social justice and sustainable development, human rights, equality and anti-discrimination, and the 5th one is participation. You can just move on there, Kim. Just very quickly, just in terms of, I suppose, the most up-to-date commitments in relation to supporting community development in terms of addressing social exclusion and equality. There are commitments in the new DRCD-led strategy, Sustainable, Inclusive and Empowered Communities, which is a 5-year strategy to support the community and voluntary sector in Ireland. And I say DRCD, or the Department of Rural and Community Development, led, because while it is led by that department, it is a whole of government approach to that. And I myself and my colleague Rachel Doyle were both members of the cross-sectoral interdepartmental committee that developed the framework and are now seeking to have it implemented. And some of the things in there were hard fought for. So some of them, people who will be familiar with community development will see as a gain, but at the moment, as we constantly say, they are just words on a page for now. So it talks about things like national, regional and local structures that facilitate and promote effective local development, autonomous community development and engagement of communities. It talks about long-term strategic community development and local development programming. It talks about developing education and training mechanisms based on the All-Ireland Standards for Community Work. If you just click it on there, Kim. It talks about core funding for autonomous community development. It talks about reviewing the current commissioning model that has, we feel, has had a very negative effect on community development. It talks about actioning the public sector duty, actioning the sustainable development goals and actioning climate action. And if you go on there and then finish a little bit on the programme for government, the programme for government does commit to looking at new ways of measuring well-being and progress. It talks about a new social contract, so it talks about rigorous implementation of that roadmap for social inclusion that we touched on earlier. It talks about creating new pathways for long-term undocumented people. It talks about ending direct provision, implementing a National Traveller Health Action Plan and a stronger National Traveller and Roma inclusion strategy. And it talks about publishing a new National Action Plan Against Racism, which Stacia might touch on as she is on the committee, and a migrant integration strategy. And just the final one, it talks about building stronger and safer communities. So it talks about initiating a new anti-poverty, social inclusion and community development action plan. It talks about fully implementing sustainable, inclusive and empowered communities. And it talks about introducing on a phased basis a number of projects similar in approach, as they put it, to the community development projects. And finally, supporting and enhancing a social innovation fund. And people will have seen some of the outcomes of that in the new Rethink Ireland funds that are available for equality and social inclusion work. So that's just to give you an overview. Just go on to the next one, Kim. Yeah, just to give you an overview of what's going on nationally in terms of poverty and social inclusion. And I suppose our own emphasis on community work has been really a critical part of that participation field. So I'm going to hand over to Anastasia now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne. I want to say a little bit about myself then, and a little bit about my starting points, then talk a little bit maybe about Louth, talk a little bit about the community work and community development, focusing also on the current situation which you face very explicitly, but we all face as well because of Brexit and because of the changing UK legislation at the moment, and focusing also on racism. And then finally, to leave you with a few questions that I'm just hoping we might have some time to discuss. I've been involved in community work and community development all my life. And I have to say, it's very much my starting contention that programs like SICAP are just cannot run without having a community development approach. And as someone who was actively involved and one of the founder members, founder board member and vice chair for many years of what was then ADM and has since become Pavee, I'd have to say that I think successive programs have seen that sort of capacity for autonomous community work and community development as part of SICAP diluted on one hand, in the call, which I'm sure you're all driven crazy by, for a centralized planning process that allows you to plan locally only within the terms that are set centrally, which is why a number of us are calling for autonomous community development that allows real local participation and planning. And secondly, I'd have to say, and that I'm very, the public participation networks are something that have always interested me, having been part for many years of a number of different campaigns as part of the Community Workers Cooperative and then Community Work Ireland for reform of local government. And on the face of it, it is really important that people participate and have a right to have a say. But from the very beginning, the focus of participation that a number of us were concerned about were always participation by the most marginalised, by groups representing the most marginalised, by the groups that don't have a say in current local authority structures. And by and large, those are the groups that represent marginalised groups, represent travellers, represent minorities, represent people who are part of your community and Louth and part of every community in Ireland by now. And I think as well that maybe we have a little bit to go when we're talking about participation, because if we look at the slide that Anne put up about participation and representation, we're sort of caught in a bit of a bind where our participation networks and frameworks elect people to represent others on them, which in a way almost contradicts the whole concept or idea of participation, maybe challenges us to begin to think about what do we mean by participation and who actually participates. I've always found it very interesting, the three categories for participation in public participation networks. It seems to me that social inclusion actually needs to be a cross-cutting category, and it needs to, in fact, to be part of all of the other arenas and all of the other areas. But to say a bit about myself, I know you've already said I'm involved with Pavee Point and have been involved in work with travellers and on racism for at least 35 years now. And that came directly from my own experience as an emigrant in the UK, where I worked with Irish emigrants at a time when in the 1970s, people refused to believe that what we might have been experiencing at that time was racism. And it was only when the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4 and Maguire 7 were wrongly convicted for crimes which, if they had been convicted of them 20 years previously, some of them might actually have been executed. It was only when they were wrongly convicted that people began to see that our experience was one of racism. And it was very easy for me to make parallels then when I came back to Ireland with travellers and with the experience of travellers here as been explicitly one of racism, although indeed that ground was very firmly contested for a very long time. I've also, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that having been involved in work with migrants, when I came back here, I also became involved in work on emigration, and I was part of setting up what has now become the Irish Commission for Prisoners Overseas, which campaigned successfully initially for the release of the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4 and Maguire 7, but since has become involved with a lot of other prisoners overseas, and more recently with the setting up of the Migrants' Rights Centre Ireland, as we moved from being a country which was for a couple of hundred years sending people out of the country to a host country. As our figures began to shift, it became very clear that our notions of ourselves as inclusive and downtrodden didn't extend to the way that we treated other people who came into the country, and certainly in the process we tended to ignore the realities of ongoing diversity in Ireland. I always believed, and I worked in Maynooth University for nearly 33 years after I came back, I always believe that those of us involved in teaching community work ought to be very directly involved in it. So for that reason, I have maintained my very direct involvement in a number of ways, including the ones that I have just mentioned. My starting points in this discussion, I believe that seeing and putting principles into practice is not impossible, but it does demand continual attention to those principles and beyond the sort of lip service that we might be inclined to give them. Secondly, I think collective progress is essential, and never more essential than now, and needs to go way beyond the individual charity that has been a feature, indeed sometimes an essential feature of earlier responses to the pandemic. So if we're looking for collective progress, we need to look beyond just individual charity. Thirdly, and Anne has already mentioned this, exclusion and discrimination are caused. They're not natural. As women, we know that the exclusion and discrimination that we experience, and indeed the evidence is now showing it very clearly, is not natural. It's because of men attempting to maintain their power in a very direct and ongoing way. And perhaps that analogy can be quite well sort of put to also to ourselves, and how, as maybe white settled people, we may be trying to maintain our power in a very direct way. Thirdly, I would say there's no quick fix or one size solution. You know, not one size does not fit all. And it's not we can't look to automatic solutions. The solutions that may work in one area won't work in another area. And then lastly, sorry, did something go a little bit wrong there? Never mind, it doesn't matter. And then I believe also, though, that when we're not looking for one easy solution, we also need to look to intersectionality. It does make a difference if you're a woman experiencing poverty. It does make a difference if you're a woman experiencing racism. It does make a difference if you're a disabled woman experiencing both racism and poverty. So the way these things multiply and intersect to create a multiplication of conditions also needs to be understood. If we just set out to address social exclusion, then we could reach the conclusion that one size might fit all. I come from Meath, from a place called Screen in County Meath, which is not 1,000 miles away from County Louth, from a rural background. And for me, I think what is very important for us to recognise that your county is changed and changing. It's been changed dramatically over the years, and that its particular geographic location has a very direct impact on how it has grown and developed over the years. I mean, for example, I'd suggest to you, though, that alongside that particular geographic location, there's always been class divisions in your county, both urban and rural class divisions, and there's always been diversity. I know a number of travellers, for example, from Louth, and I'm very familiar now with a number of asylum seekers, refugees, and migrant workers who are based in County Louth. And I think maybe when we're considering what we're talking about, when we're talking about community, we need to be clear that community is not, community and those most marginalised in the community needs to explicitly include those groups. And thirdly, I'd say in Louth and elsewhere, that we need to be careful at the moment of pandemic polemics, and I'm going to try to deal a little bit like that, because we will either through this polemic, these polemics and through the pandemic, we will either cement the status quo or hasten a new deal. And I wouldn't bet that we're not heading towards cementing the status quo. Now, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and this is more a rhetorical question than anything else, if I'm suggesting that in order to not cement the status quo, we need to use a community development approach, and both Maeve and Anne have already spoken about community development, I think maybe a useful question to ask is, with regard to your understanding or our understanding of community development, and where did you get it from? You know, how did that understanding grow and develop? What do you see? What's your perception of community work in Louth? You know, what do you see happening around you? And then from your own point of view, because a number of you have spoken already about how it underpins your work, how does it underpin your work? What does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis? Where are the 5 principles that Maeve already spoke about, like collectivity, like participation, like justice and equality and human rights? Where are they evident? In particular, where are you bringing people together collectively? But I think it's also useful to say a little bit, or to look back at the community, and especially important at the moment, because at the moment I'm very struck by the sort of discourse that has developed over the last couple of months, which presents communities as ideal. And I suggest for us to make any difference in terms of social inclusion, or any difference as taking a community work approach, we need to look to the real rather than the ideal. And then I would say see community work or community development as a journey from the real, a collective journey from the real to the ideal. You know, and acknowledge also, for example, the shifting and contested boundaries and allegiances and voices. Communities are places where there are contested boundaries, where there are different allegiances, where there are different voices, and where I'd suggest in the last while participation has become an end in itself. It's seen as the answer rather than being a means to begin to address structural issues. And by structural issues, I mean the right of a community and the right of the participants and the members of a community to have a say in things that happen outside the boundaries of that community. If we start from a perspective of expecting that self-help is all that's required, and all that's required is for the things that can be resolved in the community to be resolved, we're not going to get very far. I'm not saying we won't do anything. We could do some reasonably good work. We can bring people together and collectively, but in effect what we're doing is reinforcing community boundaries and reinforcing power relations. Community is also a gendered space with gendered relations of oppression. And sometimes when I look around the country at the moment at partnerships, and I'm delighted to see so many women here today in local development companies, I'm surprised to find the number of men who are still leading them, and I'm surprised to find the number of men who are still chairs of them, and a little concerned to see more women reflected in the structures, and not just more women reflected in the structures because it's not any woman on anybody's terms, but see more concern about marginalised and minority women reflected in the work that's undertaken, and see their voices represented in the structures and in the work to address oppression as well. But having said all of that, I think for those of us involved in community work, we really need to see communities as a potential site for liberation. The potential site for liberation, if we can move from individual needs to collective interests, from just saying, you know, all we need to do is organise to deliver all the food parcels maybe during the pandemic, an essential way of meeting individual needs. But how do you create conditions from that to ensure, for example, that collectively what happened then doesn't happen again if there is, and indeed there may be, as you know, another surge in the pandemic. So to do community work, to take that journey from the real to the ideal, suggesting that it does require ongoing analysis, action, reflection, and accountable autonomy. And I like the word accountable autonomy, because what I'm saying really is that you can't just you can't just decide yourself. And I often think it's useful to think of ourselves as community workers as facing in 3 ways. One, to the values of community work and to the definition and understanding that we've already spoken of on one hand. Secondly, to the sort of interests of the community and what the community is concerned about. And thirdly, to managing the dynamics that are associated with our employers, you know, which sometimes can be difficult enough. So I'm suggesting that that sort of accountable autonomy takes courage and takes capacity to manage what can be a relatively difficult sort of a situation. And then to go back to the point I was making about the sort of change, community work could be seeking changes in procedure and practice, and that could be very local. And there's nothing wrong with that, as I was saying. Changes in procedures to make sure that all sorts of people can get the benefits that they need during this current situation. But I'd suggest if you were doing that using a community work approach, you'd also be concerned to know their views and to know how people that are being supported want that support and how they'd like to be involved and associated with it. Second sort of change could be changes in policy and in law. And third sort of change in overall thinking and the overall agenda. And in my own work with travellers over the years, I'm very conscious of the struggle to bring about changes in procedures and practice on one hand, and then the push to bring about changes in policy, like the Traveller Accommodation Act of 1998, like the, for example, like the National Traveller Roma Inclusion Strategy of 2016. But the major struggle we began in Pavee Point, or in what was then Dublin Travellers Education and Developing Group, campaigning for acknowledgement of racism towards travellers in the mid-80s and campaigning at the same time for acknowledgement of travellers as a minority ethnic group. As you will remember, the campaign to acknowledge traveller ethnicity only ended in 2017 when that was recognised in the Dáil, and the campaign to address the racism experienced by travellers continues, even although the fact that travellers experience racism is actually acknowledged, and more recently that Roma also experience racism in Irish society. So community work for me means going the road less travelled. As activists, as analysts and as actors, we're taking a sort of that accountable autonomy I spoke of with 3 corners, managing and moving from acceptable levels of critique. And I think that for many of you at the moment and for many people involved in the current structures, there's this constant glass ceiling of an acceptable level of critique. And I'm suggesting that to really bring about change and really do community work or community development, we need to move beyond acceptable levels of critique, taking a solidarity rather than a charity approach, collective rather than individual, and moving from needs to interests. It's not just about doing your local needs survey and multiplying those then and saying, and once we've done all those together, it's about a consciousness raising process with people that supports them to articulate their interests and articulate where they need things to go in the longer run. And in particular, it needs to be focused on the most marginalised. I suggest at the moment that the language of community work and community development is very present. The term community has never been more used than in the last 6 months. And in fact, thankfully, due to the sustainable, inclusive and empowered communities, the term community work and community development has been well used. But we need to be careful we need to be careful to ensure that it's not just the language that's been used, that there's also a clear understanding and that the issues are being addressed in a way that makes sense. And then secondly, I'd suggest that there's a danger of being accommodated because the language is helpful at the moment. A return to communitarianism, which is quite controlled, is quite helpful as a way of seeing us all part of the pandemic response. But we need to be included, not just accommodated. And then lastly, I would say, in terms of COVID-19, just to finalise what I'm saying, I think we're facing a period of reinforced communitarianism, which could be very good. And that's why we have a double-edged sword, I believe. We have a reinforced sense of caring, which again could be very good if we move beyond individual caring to interests. But if we need to be careful that these don't cement rather than crack the status quo. That the narrative isn't controlled externally to the community, and that we don't get lost in a dialogue which in effect is about community control rather than community work. I'll leave you with a few questions. How do you describe Louth? How does your group contribute to community work and social inclusion? To make inclusion and inequality, including racism, visible and responded to in Louth, what do you need to keep doing? Because I'm sure you're all doing things that are very useful in that regard. What do you need to stop doing? And then what new things do you need to start doing at this point in time? I look forward to our discussion during the rest of this very interesting session. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both speakers. Kim, if I could just get slide 13, please. I suppose I've just been kind of listening and taking on board the speakers. I know kind of my takeaway from it, and give a great background and explanation. And I know ourselves, like, we are, you know, involved and implementing the sustainable, inclusive and empowered communities, and that's our roadmap, our guide. And as Anastasia said, like, that language does come out, but it's really taking a look at the questions that Anastasia left there, you know, to work with the groups on that and on ourselves on that. And I suppose my takeaway would be really the real to the ideal, accountable autonomy, and the interest versus needs. And I think that, you know, Grania's presentation overview, my presentation overview, and Anastasia, it just creates a diverse voice that, you know, we've listened to each other, we take on board. And I think on our first National Social Inclusion Week, it's a really healthy starting point to get real and dialogue. And thank you to the guest speakers. Now, moving on to our next agenda piece is the Louth Community Call, Louth's Call. And back at the start of the restrictive measures in March, we were asked by Louth County Council to become part of a multi-agency forum, and that we would support the groups at that stage of what they needed at a time that was quite scary and uncertain and unprecedented. And groups wanted support, and we listened, and they wanted help, and they were at the coal face, they were on the front line. It was very uncertain times, but the forum pulled well together, it gelled well together. It was an amazing, and it continues to be an amazing thing to be part of. And that when I was feeding needs and wants and what is happening here, there was somebody on that forum who said, I can help. So no matter what language and what dialogue, the natural ability within humans to help must come first. And we don't always get it right, but we do a lot of good work. So I'd like to just show a video now, if Kim is ready to show it, just on the community forum. You might hear a bit of what you've just heard in this webinar, but just about the community forum, how we've worked with the Louth County Council, the Louth Volunteer Centre, all the stakeholders on the forum, library, DESP, guards, on post, it was TUSLA, it was just the networks that have formed from it for the greater needs. And it is what we do, and you're right, it is what we do from here, but this is just that stage in March and our efforts, and really this is the group story in this video. We can set the background and how we help, but this is really the groups on the coal face and how the amazing work that they have done from March to date. So if you can play, Kim.
I'm the Social Inclusion Manager for County Louth under the SICAP programme delivered by Louth LEADER Partnership Local Development Company. The SICAP programme is the Social Inclusion Community Activation Programme. It's funded by the Department of Rural Community Development, administered by the Local Community Development Committee, the LCDC, and delivered here by us in Louth LEADER Partnership. In March, when restrictive measures were introduced due to COVID-19, we were consulted by Louth County Council to join a multi-agency community call forum. SICAP offers a range of developmental supports under two goals. Goal 1, community development and social enterprise, and Goal 2, lifelong learning, employment, enterprise and children and family supports. As we celebrate National Social Inclusion Week, I'm delighted to tell you about some of the engagement, collaboration and involvement that SICAP has been part of under the community call, and how we have been supporting the local community groups to support our most vulnerable communities during COVID-19.
My name is Mary Deary and I work in Louth County Council Social and Community Department. So essentially how the Community Call Centre worked, or some people call it the Community Helpline, worked was that when people would ring in, we would mobilise, in Louth County Council, we would mobilise a response to that call. That call could often mean just delivering of groceries or or medicine or the collecting of a pension, and that was a very simple task. All we had to do was mobilise the volunteer that was closest to the person that made the call. To support all of those groups, we had Louth LEADER Partnership, who made weekly calls to make sure that those groups could stay open, either as a walk-in service or as a remote service, so that when we needed to call on these people as a response, the groups were there with the expertise that was needed.
I'm Gráinne Barrell and I'm the manager of Louth Volunteer Centre. So when the government set up the community call forums in response to the COVID crisis back in late March, we were delighted to have the opportunity to be able to do something within our communities to make a difference. We were part of a working group of organisations under the community call forum, Louth County Council, Louth PPN, Louth LEADER Partnership, SICAP team and ourselves. And we all worked together very effectively to, I suppose, have the best response possible for the community here in Louth. So Louth Volunteer Centre's role in the community call forum was the volunteer support. So those volunteers who were the responders really to calls coming into the community call forum helpline. And what we did was we provided guidance and supports directly to volunteers, whether it was groups or individuals, so that they could keep themselves safe when they were responding to requests for help. We also did Garda vetting of volunteers, and our big task, I suppose, was we mapped the volunteer response here in Louth right down to street and townland level. So what that meant was when a caller rang into the helpline, the closest volunteer could be identified, so it was the most effective response, both from a speed perspective and a safety perspective for our community as a whole.
My name is Mary Carpenter. I am the treasurer of the RD Active Retirement Group. We're an active retirement group. We organise outings and meetings for our group, and we have a yoga group, a craft group and a walking group. SICAP have helped us by providing funding for us to get our groups restarted, i.e. protective equipment for our members and funding to finish a project that we started pre-COVID.
So my name is Cleena Cunningham. I'm the coordinator of Connect Family Resource Centre in Drogheda. So we support community members of all age groups. We do a wide range of services, including low-cost counselling, food hampers, family support programmes such as Rainbows, parenting when separated, parenting adolescents, and we also have our Beacon Family Support and Footsteps programme for young people. So SICAP supports us during COVID by providing funding, which we spent on food hampers and care hampers to give out to community members. They also provided COVID-19 training to support the staff and the centre to open safely. And they provided support by the phone, check-ins, and if there was any support or information needed.
Andrea Conley. I'm the project manager of Codgilin. Codgilin is a community service provider for older and vulnerable people. SICAP in Louth helped us in regard to, they kind of had set up the community response effort, is where they contacted all different organisations that had remained open, ourselves being one of them, and asked what were we willing to do. And then the SICAP, through the Louth Partnership, allowed us maybe to apply for grants, such as because we were using extra petrol and that while we were carrying out these activities, and also grants for PPE to make sure that we were well protected while we were carrying out the activities. They also built up like a large network from different organisations that we got a lovely letter from them saying, you know, thanks for all that you have done, and that we're going to keep the list intact so that should things become bad again, we'll have to kind of have it in place.
My name is David Larkin. I'm currently the PR officer with an organisation called Disability Louth. Disability Louth was set up in mid-2016 and it's by far composed of primarily volunteers. And the objective is to promote, develop and engage the interests of persons with disability through publicity, through training and engaging with local decision makers in County Louth. During COVID and particularly during the lockdown, SICAP gave us the facility to extend the reach of our existing helpline, which is there for members to use, and it became part of Louth County Council's community call. We also had online Zoom training supported by SICAP for people who weren't familiar with that means of communication, to allow our meetings to go virtual and for people to keep in touch. And during the period, SICAP also continued with any funding that financial funding that we required.
Dave Turner, I'm the voluntary manager here at the Drogheda District Support for Older People. Okay, here we're connected with old people. We do everything we can to help old people with any problem they may have, including a good morning call service in the mornings where we phone about 120 people up every morning to make sure they're okay. We have a care and repair team where we go around doing people's gardens and households. And we also have an office here which I'm sitting in where we help people with any problems they may have. SICA, they have helped us with this current COVID epidemic by firstly helping us secure funds and secondly putting us in touch with other organisations so we can all work together for the betterment of the older people.
Ejiro Ohe Stratton is my name. I am the founder of a new organisation here in Drogheda called Hands for Unity. So Hands for Unity is a new not-for-profit organisation based here in County Louth. Our aim is to bring all the different nationality women who have settled here in Ireland and in Drogheda together in one room collaboratively to solve problems here in Ireland and back home in their own home countries. We do this by giving them interview coaching, and then we trash problems with them that we can help them solve. So SICAP during the COVID has actually enabled our organization to keep going. They provided us with information from time to time. They kept in contact with us. They gave us training. They were able to fund our Zoom license to bring us to the online platform. They were able to fund our website so that we stay visible to those who want to access our service. They connected us with people in the community who were in need of the services that we provide to keep us growing in our organization.
Lucy Rafferty. I am manager of Moorheavnamore Community Youth Project. We are here to support young people. We have an after schools project, we have a teen Garda diversion project, and we have a summer project. With the help of Louth LEADER Partnership, SICAP, an application was made and we were successful to carry out a murals on our garden walls where when the children would return to the projects in September, they had really nice, eye-catching, welcoming murals outside, not just grey walls.
I'm Helen Thompson and I'm the manager of Maynooth District Development. We're a social economy enterprise that addresses the issues of this rural area, including economic, social, recreation, personal development and environmental issues through the principles of community development. SICAP was a vital support for us during COVID. The work especially with her daily communication and check-ins, funding for mental health packs for our young people in the community. They also provided funding for our PPE equipment to reopen and also provided the training for a safe return to work.
Hi, my name is Colin Roach and I am the General Manager of the Redeemer Family Resource Centre. At the Redeemer Family Resource Centre, we look to provide health, sport and educational amenities to the community and surrounding area of Dundalk. SICAP has really helped us during the COVID pandemic by providing funding for my staff to be trained, specifically in the COVID area. We have also been able to provide vouchers for the senior citizens in the area who have come through hard times during COVID with cocooning and being isolated.
Connecting.
Togetherness.
Access. Equality.
Activity.
Wholesome.
Togetherness.
Engagement.
Support.
thank you everybody for taking the time just to watch that video. It's the first draft of it, but I wanted it as a special preview in Social Inclusion Week, just to say thank you to the local community groups, just that innate human value to help people when times are tough. And it was just, and continues to be, just a pleasure. They spoke, we listened, we supported, we were there, they were, it's been just an amazing, even if it is a starting point to greater dialogue. It was just such an unprecedented and uncertain time, and everybody just gelled so well together. And I just really want to thank our local community groups for stepping up and supporting the most vulnerable communities across County Louth. I'm really sorry I couldn't get all of our groups. We just got just a mix of groups and the people who they support and the locations throughout County Louth, from north, mid and south. And I hope in Social Inclusion Week that, you know, I just want to say thank you, and thanks to the forum, the council setting up, asking us to be part of it, Louth Volunteer Centre, all the people in the forum, just everybody was just, what can I do, how can we help? And it continues to be a great experience as a social inclusion manager to see so many agencies pulling together. And I suppose in a way that brought us together was quite a tough time, but you know, just thank you is really all I can say. So just as we begin to close the webinar, the panelists are available. Myself, Grania, Mary, Anne and Anastasia, and we're willing to take any questions if you use the chat function. I think we have one. Thank you to Lisa. And Mary, it's going to answer that. There, dearie.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Okay, well, I mean, what happens in the next 2 or 3 years post-COVID is probably as daunting as COVID itself, because we're not right sure what's going to happen. The European multi-annual support framework is being agreed. Presumably we'll have CAP and LEADER coming from that. I would imagine there'll be some European social funds that will also be supporting the SICAP programme. But more importantly, on a national issue, I think community development hasn't gone off the agenda. It's still very much there. I think over the past few years, what we have seen is, I suppose, a more cohesive version of community development, in that more of the community actors have been pulled together, particularly in the local community development committee known as the LCDCs. And I think that has probably done made huge benefit for the community in itself, because when we have key people who are doing the same work, working for the betterment of the community, working together, and I think the Community Call Forum, as you said, Maeve, actually I suppose underlined and underpinned how well we can work together. I think personally, from looking at some of the work that's been done by my counterparts in other counties, I think Louth is up there as one of the best, if not the best, in terms of the working relationship that exists between the local authority community section, Louth LEADER Partnership, social inclusion section, and the LEADER programme as well, for that matter, and the Louth Volunteer Centre, who works on behalf of and supports the volunteers in the community. And with that combination, because we all do different things, but by weaving that together, we can get the best value for money based on what we can do to support the community groups. And I think this video, and congratulations to Louth LEADER Partnership for doing this video shows that basically what we do is we support the activation of the community groups at ground level, which does a multiplier of work in terms of finance on the ground with individuals and with the citizens. And I think that is a tapestry of success.
Excellent, thank you, Mary. Actually, just everybody's just really thanking us now for a very informative, and that they've learned things and that they didn't understand structures before now. So as I say, if this is our starting point to real dialogue, I mean, this is our starting point. Couldn't be better than National Social Inclusion Week, and using how we did pull together and listen to the needs. And if we can raise that then higher in my job and my role at the policy level, then this is a great start. for us today, and that we've pulled together. We've had great agencies. Our groups are amazing. Our guest speakers are amazing. And somebody wants to just ask a question here.
Sorry, if I can just come in there with just one or two comments, if that's okay at this stage, unless there's a question. Is there a question?
Yeah, go ahead, that's fine.
Okay, I mean, I'm just very interested in your video, and it just seems to indicate to me very clearly that in County Louth people are very well able to respond and to react, you know. So I would just like to encourage you to frame, you know, the next round of responses that are going to be required, also by reference to the Sustainable Development Goals, which were 5 years adopted on the 25th of this month. In particular, the one that's about leaving no one behind and progressing the ones furthest away first. And could I suggest to you that as this pandemic goes on, there are very particular groups in Louth that need the support of community development. Like, for example, to the best of my knowledge, there are some meat factories in Louth. There are particular difficulties about the structural racism and marginalisation of meat factory workers. There are migrant workers in Louth. There are some mushroom farms in Louth. There are migrant workers involved in work on a variety of things. And there are also a number of asylum seekers and refugees in Louth. And people may not always name themselves that way, and they've every right not to. But it strikes me that these are the important issues that could otherwise get left out. Secondly, I feel that your voices need to be heard also in the current negotiations with regard to Brexit, and your concerns that there shouldn't be a border, or that there shouldn't be a hard border between your country and elsewhere. As I said earlier, I do believe it's the job of community workers and community development organisations to have the courage to deal with the real issues of the day, and certainly Brexit is a real issue of the day for County Louth. Thirdly, it strikes me that I didn't talk very much about Brexit, but as you know, one of the problems could be the way in which equality legislations get shifted, and that could have very direct implications and impacts on people who are marginalised just on their side of the border, which of course has implications for back and forth between North and South. And it strikes me also that you know, we can't talk about social exclusion and inclusion without talking about addressing racism. And I'm a member of the National Anti-Racism Committee at the minute, which is preparing a national strategy on racism. But that does mean dealing with the racism that's structured into all of our organisations and supports. And I think I'd be saying to you, when you were responding to COVID, were there responses by diverse people, and were there responses for diverse people? And lastly, could I suggest that if we're talking about community work and community development, we need to be careful about who owns it, you know, and I'd suggest that we don't own the staff in any of the organisations that we're part of, and we don't own the groups in any of the organisations that we're part of. In the end, it strikes me that we need creative tensions between all of the sectors that are involved that can have constructive outcomes rather than becoming too comfortable with one another. And I encourage you to engage and to struggle to create those sort of creative tensions that are in the end constructive and are about people really having a say and really participating. I think it's great that you've managed to have good relations, but if you have good relations, then I think they can be built on to raise the issues and the challenges that need to be raised. Local authorities have done a half reasonable job. SICAP has done a half reasonable job. LEADER only succeeded in having a focus on social inclusion in the last iteration because it had to, because it was told by a proper focus on social inclusion, because it was told by Europe that it had to. Why not build on these things? Those doors are opening, but we're never going to build on it if we pretend that they're wide open at the moment. We've got to find the way to take the next step, in my view. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and absolutely I take on board, and we absolutely have challenges in terms of COVID-19, the landscape and how it changed so quickly, Brexit, and being in a cross-border county, and in terms of, I actually absolutely could listen to you all day in terms of social inclusion, and if we have the people at the table and have that real, everybody, that diverse voice and an open dialogue, and this is kind of where we will be heading now. And in terms of leader, I mean, I can speak in terms of Louth LEADER Partnership. Like we got so much help from leader. Our SICAP got through, and the partnership got so much help in terms of strategies we were looking at. We've just got funding for a youth enterprise traveller program, and I'm indebted really our leader program, and we work in collaboration. We're just one team here in Louth LEADER Partnership, and you're right, that is the strength you build on, and then you open your dialogues for the harder bits, not the kind of social inclusion weekend, the celebration, but also to get in to really, like, I suppose, the meat and the bones of what are we doing as community development practitioners. And we have this, and we have our agencies, and we have good relations inside Louth LEADER in our program. So we've got to, implement the strategy, and, I suppose it's been just great to listen to the guest speakers today. And I know I'll take a lot away from it, and I want everybody in the audience equally, has it made you think, what are our next steps? And I just want to thank everybody for their contributions. I'm just aware that some people have been more so comments. Just that Louth and Meath County Council are to launch their joint county migrant strategy, and the areas raised by Anastasia will be very much the focus of our work under the strategy action plan, and the local development companies in Meath and Louth will play their part in delivering the strategy in a multi-agency approach.
Good.
And I'm just on this question, it's more just thanks everybody, and it's been a great afternoon. So just before we end again, I'm going to end with the poll, just to measure, I know it's a starting point in open dialogue, and we have a lot of strengths, but we have a lot of work to do, but that's community development as well. But has the webinar increased your understanding of SICAP and the PPN? And would you be interested in attending future webinars on social inclusion? It'd be led by the staff and community groups. Okay. So thank you very much. We just approached 3:30 now, so it just leaves me to thank Rania and Mary and Anastasia. And there's a lot of take home and thinking for today, and I'm very excited, and I hope to see you at upcoming events. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.